Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our one and only event of the month this month. Today, we have Professor Polycarp giving a talk. Professor Polycarp is a philosophy professor at Kent State University, and he obtained his BA and both MA in philosophy at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. And I'm glad he could join us today. Professor Polycarp, is there anything you would like to add to your introduction?
I think, no, that's fine. Okay. Sure. Can everyone see? Okay.
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my ideas with you. Before I actually go to read my paper, I want to motivate this talk with a true story, which I think is quite relevant to this talk, and also my view regarding the issue of human rights. Many years ago, my second son, at that time, I think he was in a 5th grade or 4th grade, thereabout. He came and said, "Oh, Dad, they taught us in school today about rights. I have the right to this, I have the right to this, and you don't have to make me to do things in this house because I have certain rights." And I said, "Really? That's nice." And I said, "Okay, did they also tell you anything about duties?" He said, "What is that?" I said, "Oh, they didn't teach you anything about responsibilities and duties?" I said, "No." And I said, "Okay, so the rights that you would be enjoying in this house, how do you think you're going to be enjoying the rights?" I said, "Well, you have a right to eat. Who do you think has a duty to provide that food for you?" Then he was looking at me. So, and I said, "Maybe if you don't want to perform certain duties like your chores that make this house run so that everything will be okay, we all can enjoy our rights, maybe you should go outside. Go and live outside and you would enjoy your rights." And he said, "No, Dad, I cannot do that." I said, "That's precisely the point. If you go outside, you don't have any rights as such. Your rights are not meaningful. You enjoy your rights because you live inside this house and we all agree to perform certain duties that would make your rights substantive." So that was a true story. As a way of teaching my son some of the ideas that I'm going to be sharing in this paper. So let me start. Communalism is one organizing feature or principle of African ideas, beliefs, thoughts, and way of life. Hence, it is a major theme in African philosophy. My aim is to briefly explicate African communalism as a basis for understanding its view and practice of substantive human rights, which is based on the moral correlativity of rights and duties. African communalism is rooted in the idea of a group of people with common kinship and aspirations living proximately together in solidarity. They organize their lives cooperatively as an organic social-moral system based on duties and the communal values of caring and friendship. These values and duties are a means of promoting general welfare and communal harmonious living that enhance substantive individual rights and dignity. These communal values emphasize A, the priority of self regarding and other regarding duties. And B, the reciprocity of duties. These duties include perfect duties of non-interference that are engendered by rights, and imperfect duties that do not necessarily correlate to rights. These imperfect duties include supererogatory duties that are beyond the call of duty, and prima facie duties that can be overridden by various moral considerations. The ideas of priority and reciprocity of duties and requisite communal values are implicated in the social nature of humans and the African normative idea of personhood. On this view, personhood involves an earned status that derives from A, human metaphysical capacities, and B, social moral recognition based on how properly one uses these capacities in agency for moral and human excellence by performing relevant duties. This normative idea of personhood that undergirds the African practice of substantive individual rights is dependent on a communal system of rights. This system involves, one, a social moral conception of rights which specifies the dignity of the person and the value of rights as prima facie entitlements that inhere or are instantiated in persons. Two, a social moral culture that ensures the priority and reciprocity of duties and provides the social mechanisms for substantively enhancing rights and achieving self-perfection. However, John Donnelly argues, quote, the concept of human rights is an artifact of modern Western civilization, and that most Western, non-Western cultural and political traditions lack not only the practice of human rights, but the very concept of human rights. In his view, non-Western cultures only have a conception of duty, responsibility, or the right thing to do. Thus, priority inherent human rights. He indicates that the Western concept of human right implies that one has rights by virtue of simply being born human. Human rights are, in his words, quote, special entitlements of persons that one has because one is a human being. They derive from inherent dignity of the human person. In his words, they are not mere benefits, duties, privileges, or some other perhaps related practice. Thus, human rights are independent of other humans and a community, and one does not have to do anything in order to have rights. Rights are a means of maintaining and protecting the intrinsic moral dignity of humans and their capacities. Using Donnelly's view as a contrasting backdrop, let me examine Menkiti's communal idea of priority of duties and its implication for the African idea and practice of substantive rights. In contrasting African communal traditions and modern Western liberal traditions, Menkiti indicates, quote, African societies tend to be organized around the requirements of duty, while Western societies tend to be organized around the postulation of individual rights. In the African understanding, priority is given to the duties which individuals owe to the collectivity. And their rights, whatever these may be, are seen as secondary to their exercise of their duties. In the West, we find a construal of things in which certain specified rights of individuals are seen as antecedent to the organization of society, with the function of government viewed consequently as being the protection and defense of these individuals' rights. The long quote from Menkiti. Let me highlight some essential points in this contrast. In the Western traditions, rights are entitlements that inhere in human nature, dignity, and the capacities of rationality and autonomy. These inherent human rights, which are inalienable, are logically antecedent and prior to the existence and human inhabitation of society or state. The function of the state or society is to protect these rights against violations by others. Thus, human rights logically correlate to the perfect duty of non-interference by others. The implication is that because individual rights pre-exist the society cannot determine the nature or scope of or violate human rights. In Mekidi's view, African communalism are organized around the requirements of duties based on the principles of need and reciprocity of duties. Priority is given to the duties owed to the collectivity and others over individual rights. Duties are primary, while rights are secondary, that is, relative to the practical existence of duties. Individual rights are sustained by caring, solidarity, and the communal reciprocity and performance of duties to the collectivity, self, and others. Given that the collectivity involves solidarity among communally integrated individuals. But how should we understand Mekidi's idea of priority of duties and the secondary status of rights? Do these ideas imply that African traditions lack a concept of right? And the practice of respecting and protecting human rights? The African ideas of priority and reciprocity of duties and the interplay between rights and duties reflect the idea of moral perfectionism. They indicate the processes and conditions by which humans actualize and perfect their socio-moral nature. This perfectionist idea indicates that the good and well-being of others and the welfare of the community in terms of the duty to promote them contributes substantially to one's own good, well-being, and self-perfection. The idea is that when everyone contributes to peace and harmony in the community, which enhance the welfare of others, others will reciprocate. In all likelihood, this would create an environment that provide material conditions and goods for one to enjoy one's own well-being. However, for those, beg your pardon, the African idea of priority of duties is thus a precondition for maintaining and enhancing individual substantive rights that derive from the idea of a harmonious community. It provides the requisite environment, goods, and material conditions for health, food, and shelter. It indicates norms that specify a broad set of duties to nurture, respect, and protect human capacities, dignity, and relevant rights. This idea of substantive human rights reflects the social nature of one's humanness, which indicates that the human need to rely on others and the relationships in the communal context. We need a community to provide the material conditions by which humans actualize their potentials, perfect their humanness, lead their lives, experience and maintain dignity, and use their capacities to make choices in agency to achieve their interest and well-being. However, for individuals who lack the requisite or developed capacity to perform relevant duties, such as children, disabled, and the elderly, they are owed the broader sense of duties, caring, kindness, and love that do not necessarily depend on or derive from having rights. The priority of duties indicate broadly the various duties to nurture love, care, and provide for the needs of such people and enhance their well-being. However, for those who are competent with the requisite capacities, the ascription of personhood and rights indicates that they are able to prioritize duties to serve others and the community. Reciprocity of duties indicate that no conflict exists between self-regarding and other-regarding duties. By performing duties that promote the well-being of others, one invariably promotes one's own well-being. The duties to others and community are ostensibly duties to oneself, because by reciprocity of duties, one's duty to others imposes on them the duty to reciprocate. That is, to respect, protect, and enhance one's personhood, rights, well-being, and dignity. What is the implication of the idea of priority and reciprocity of duties for a conception of human rights in African communal tradition? In order to address this question, let me critically reflect on Donnelly's rendition of the modern liberal Western idea of human rights in order to further illuminate its contrast with the African view. Does the Western liberal idea of pre-existing human rights involve substantive rights? Claims that people have a positive duty to recognize, defend, promote, and enhance in the community? It appears that the Western liberal concept of human rights implicated in Donnelly's account involves abstract entitlements that are attached to the natural metaphysical capacities of atomistic and solitary persons that are abstracted from or pre-exist the human society. This concept of human rights indicates that rights are abstract and logical predicates in the form of a universal generalization. For any X, if X is human, then X has human rights, Y. In this case, Y is a mere abstract entitlement that lacks substantive contents. This idea of pre-existing human rights that inhere naturally and necessarily in solitary persons independent of the community is vacuous or precarious. Such rights are sustainable, made substantive and meaningful in a communal context that provides the material goods, wealth, basic needs, opportunities, and conditions for one to actualize them. Without a community, one's rights to life, freedom, or property is abstract and without content. Usually, it is a community that determines the nature, content, and scope of a right and enforces it by indicating what specifically is protected, when, and how. On the African communal view, it is a community and a priority of duties that provide substance, content, meaning, enhancement, and protection for rights. Without a community, a system of rights and norms indicating the priority and performance of duty, rights would be nominal. An adequate theory of human rights must indicate how to translate the nominal or abstract pre-existing natural rights into substantive rights within a society. The African idea of communalism does precisely this. It focuses on the positive duties that provide for individual substantive needs, well-being, and the means for making rights substantive. Such positive means of duty is not emphasized in the Western liberal view of natural rights because its focus is on the negative duty of non-interference. Hence, for example, an individual right to life does not involve or impose a positive duty on others or society to save it or to provide the means to sustain it. Let me illuminate this idea of abstract right. Suppose you live in a jungle where people live solitary lives without a community, social systems of right, and norms of duty. You encounter another person much bigger, stronger, and more powerful. He wants to take the food or your property, the food you've gathered, and you resist. He decides that he will take your life to enable him to take your property. Imagine telling him that you have a right to your property and life, and that he has a duty not to interfere with them. Yes, you have abstract or nominal rights to your property and life by virtue of being human. But such right claims as entitlement and the correlative duties to respect them, or the duty of non-interference, are meaningless and empty. The idea of substantive rights makes sense only in the context of communal material conditions, norms, and duties, and rules that protect and enhance one's capacities. Only such rules can substantively ensure the absence of interference with one's capacity that would allow one to actualize one's entitlement and make them substantive. Thus, a right cannot be substantive in the absence of a society. It is pertinent to illustrate practically the plausible distinction between substantive and abstract rights, and how priority of duties in a community is necessary for the idea and practice of substantive rights. Supposing one has a check representing a sum of money in the bank, where the bank represents a community, that one's parents, representing what nature has endowed us with, left one as inheritance. The cash would be one's substantive entitlement right. The check is a mere abstract representation of that money, that right. Assuming that banks are closed permanently, in other words, a community does not exist, one will be unable to cash the check to buy essential goods or needs, given that rights are only tools or means for one's agency for achieving one's interests or needs. One would need a banking system that is a community that prioritizes duties where the bankers, people in the community in this case, perform their duties for one to deposit the cash or check, to deposit the check in order to cash it. This is the only way to make the abstract right of the check substantive. The check is useless without bankers and a banking system to perform the requisite positive duties to validate the check for cashing and depositing. The negative duty of non-interference by the bankers or bank is not enough for one to cash the check, enjoy the inheritance, or make the abstract right substantive. Similar to a community, determining the contents, scope, and limits of individual substantive rights, the banking system determines how to validate, deposit a check, acceptable identifications, when one can withdraw the money, and the limits on withdrawal. With this at the backdrop, it seems presumptuous for Donnelly to say that the concept of human right is an artifact of modern Western civilization, and that non-Western cultures lack the concept and practice of human rights. This implies that what the West has characterized as universal in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights involves Western cultural and value imperialism, an effort by the West to universalize and impose on other culture a Western artifact or view of human rights that is alien to those cultures. This is wrong. Donnelly's idea that non-Western cultures lack the concept of right, but have a conception of duty is absurd. He underscores this particular point by quoting Dworkin's distinction between a concept, what something means, and a conception, a particular or more concrete specification of that concept. This suggests that non-Western cultures do not understand that their conception of duty is correlatively embedded in the concept of right. Hence, they have a conception or a concrete specification of something that they lack a concept of. It is unclear how one can have a conception of something that one does not have a concept of. If the concept of duty is a logical correlative of the concept of right. One cannot have a conception of duty if one does not have the concept of right, of which the duty is a logical correlative. It also involves a misunderstanding of African views and practices. The African communal idea of priority of duties indicates that they realize that the various duties are a moral and material correlative of rights, because substantive rights cannot be sustained, can only be sustained when people perform requisite duties. A duty to recognize, protect, respect, or not interfere with X as a right, be it life, freedom, or property, regarding a person P, implies that X, the right in this case, is a valuable entitlement, privilege, goal, need, or interest for P. This implies that normatively, X, the right, needs to be respected, protected, provided for, enhanced, made substantive, and X imposes broad obligations on others to do so. The broad obligation in this case, more than the duty of non-interference. So the Western conception of human rights does overemphasize one's entitlement without a corresponding emphasis on individual positive duties to others and the community. The emphasis on the negative duty of non-interference is on the negative duty of non-interference. The African view emphasizes a broad set of positive prima facie, supererogatory, and imperfect duties as practically necessary for maintaining substantive rights, general welfare, and dignity for every person, especially the vulnerable, children, physically and mentally disabled, and elderly who need help. The duty that we owe vulnerable people, and perhaps everyone, should not only be the perfect negative duty of non-interference that correlate to rights. Such negative duties indicate only what one should not do. It does not indicate positively what one should do to provide for these people's needs or everyone's needs and welfare. Rights and negative duty of non-interference alone do not indicate the positive duties that others and the community have to provide shelter, food, and health care. This is especially so for those who cannot provide for themselves, for no fault of theirs, or for reasons beyond their control. For these people, and perhaps everyone else, the non-interference with their rights, or simply leaving them alone, or allowing them to provide for their own needs, will not be enough. The idea of priority of duties indicate that we need substantive positive duties to nurture one's capacity, enhance one's well-being, dignity, rights, and maintain a system of human rights and general welfare. On this African view, the relevant emphasis is not their rights, but the various duties to provide for their needs, to nurture them, to enrich their lives, and enhance their dignity and well-being. These broad and robust duties make their rights substantive. Thus, as Kemuru indicates, quote, the African view is that the notion of duty itself guarantees individual human rights, the individual human rights of a person, as well as their well-being and dignity. Why the idea of human rights in Western philosophical discourse is an approach to the issue of human dignity, the requirement of duty embedded in the idea of personhood represent an African approach to securing a life of dignity. One can secure a life of dignity only if one has or can be provided with the basic needs and the opportunity to provide for oneself shelter, food, and health. This requires a community and positive duties by others. According to Donnelly, the Western idea of human rights represents a distinctive approach to the problem of human dignity, which deserves to be fully and fairly evaluated on its own merits, not its parentage. We must move beyond a limited genetic perspective to the important substantive issues raised by human rights. But what are these substantive issues? On the African view, these issues involve how to nurture, enhance, and protect individual capacities, their proper use, and how to provide the material conditions for individuals to use such capacity to achieve their well-being, interests, and experience dignity. Thus, the significant issue of substantive human rights involve the nature, scope, limits of individual entitlement that are attached to human nature as defined by their capacity. This raises issues about the nature of persons and the worth of value of human natural capacities that define a person. What are the essential communal conditions for protecting and enhancing these capacities for their valuable use in agency? On the liberal view, persons in which rights inhere are defined solely by their essential metaphysical features and capacities of volition, agency, rationality, and autonomy. This view focuses on the isolated and solipsistic nature of the person that is abstracted from society. This is different from the African normative social-communal conception of personhood in terms of the implication for the interplay between rights and duties. The African view gives credence to the metaphysical capacities, social nature of humans, and the communal context in which humans exist and thrive. In McKitty's view, a maximal view of personhood requires a process of incorporation into and recognition by a community based on the proper use of their capacities. It is in this communal context that persons optimize the use of their capacities for agency in order to make their rights substantive, meet their needs, and achieve self-actualization. African communalism and its normative idea of personhood motivate the ideas of priority and performance of duties that ensure substantive right and dignity. The African idea of substantive human rights, which is a material correlative of the priority of duties, indicate that rights are derived from social-moral nature of humans that supervene on metaphysical capacities. This human nature is implicated in the practical communal circumstances that require one to use one's capacity properly to perform duties so that one can attain personhood, experience dignity, and well-being. Hence, for McKitty, a man is defined by reference to the environing community, and the sense of identity which the individual comes to possess cannot be made sense of except by reference to these collective facts of communal gene pool, language, mental disposition, and attitudes. Individual rights are substantive and meaningful only in reference to the material communal condition, social primary good, a system of rights and duties. This idea of a well-ordered society is underscored by McKitty's idea of a collectivist community, what he calls collectivity in its truest sense, as opposed to a constituted community. The former is a thoroughly fused or socially integrated or interconnected we, and the latter is a simple aggregation of individuals. The collectivist community does not have rights that are over and above or in conflict with the substantive rights of its members. The idea of priority of duties and collective rights reflect two mutually supportive approaches to the practice of human rights in African tradition. The first emphasizes the community and collective rights, in virtue of which members can make individual rights claims. Thus, it is important to first understand people's rights before individual human rights. Once people's rights have been understood first, then the transition from those rights which people have collectively can be understood in order to move to the rights which they have individually. This is because collective rights, common good, and communal solidarity are a material precondition for substantive individual rights claims. The second is exemplified in J. Che's idea of moderate communitarianism. It seeks to maintain a balance in order to remove an apparent conflict or the extreme pulls between individual rights and duties to collectivity. This view gives credence to the dual features of the person regarding one's metaphysical capacities of autonomy and freedom, and one's social dependence on or solidarity and relationship with others and the community. These two approaches are mutually supportive in that they focus on how the community enables duties that make rights substantive. Thus, a meaningful analysis of human rights must include its genesis, its correlativity with duty, and the communal and practical conditions for its protection, enhancement, thriving, and sustenance. Donnelly suggests that an analysis of human rights should be independent of its genesis, socio-practical context, and correlativity with duty. Such analysis would be problematic because the idea of right as an entitlement is a derivative concept. It is rationally derived from its genesis, which is human social nature, the worth attached to such nature, the communal and material context of human interactions, and plausible in violations, which underscore one's right as an entitlement and the duty to respect and protect it. The derivation of rights from one's social humanness is not self-evident. There is nothing intuitively inherent in one's nature that implies that one has an entitlement or a claim right. The concept of human or human nature does not logically imply rights or entitlement. According to Byron, quote, "We should not follow the authors of the United States Declaration of Independence in thinking that rights are self-evident. Instead, rights are widely disputed around the world, and such dispute give the lie to claims of self-evidence." Quote, the derivation of rights from human nature is based on constructive, practical reasoning involving experiences about human social nature, capacities, and the material circumstances of their use. Such rationally constructed or derived right and the relevant correlative duties are not absolute. Hence, there are situations in which one's rights may be violated justifiably, and duties may not be rendered or owed. The African idea of priority of duties suggests that human rights derive from facts and experiences regarding the usefulness or instrumental value of human capacities as tools. Humans attach value to their capacities because of their potential to be used properly in agency for enhancing and maintaining individual rights, dignity, well-being, and communal harmony. These facts and instrumental value motivate the idea of and the need for the various duties to nurture, protect, actualize rights, capacities, and their proper use for achieving relevant goals. Human capacities per se do not have inherent moral worth that must be protected or respected absolutely, without regards for the circumstance of use. The deontic notion of duty or respect to protect that is learned, practiced, and attached to human capacities and rights in a community take different forms depending on the individual and her circumstances. For instance, the respect and protection for children and their rights essentially involve providing for their needs, nurturing and developing their capacities. Their needs and providing for them might be slightly different from someone with mental or physical disability. Respect or protection would also be different for a fully competent, rational, and autonomous adult, which is contingent on how well such adult comports herself and uses her capacity properly for her own well-being and the communal well-being. Some philosophers, Montalino, Oyowe, and J.K., among others, have misconstrued African communalism. They have criticized Menkiti's rendition of African communal view of the priority of duty to the collectivity and the secondary status of right as a radical form of communitarianism that emphasizes the community's interest and duties. Menkiti is misunderstood as implying that the communal requirements of duty necessarily infringes on individual rights, freedom, and autonomy. Like Donnelly, they argue that this suggests that Africans lack the practice and concept of human rights. In many discussions about African communalism and its implication for human rights, people usually focus on the emphasis on community and the idea that the duty to the community has priority over individual rights. Usually, not much is said about the emphasis on the goal of communal harmony, the duties of caring, welfare, and solidarity, and how they enhance and sustain individual rights, dignity, and well-being. For instance, Koba indicates that Africans emphasize groupness, sameness, and commonality. The African worldview is tempered with the general guiding principle of the survival of the entire community and a sense of cooperation, interdependence, and collective responsibility. This African communal idea is captured by Mbiti's parody of Descartes. I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am. This idea is also expressed by the idea of Ubuntu, the view that a person is a person through other persons. Ubuntu is understood as saying that my humanity, well-being, and dignity and rights are inextricably tied to the humanity, well-being, dignity, and rights of others in the community, and that one's ultimate aim is to act to improve one's own well-being, which is best achieved by communal living, friendship, and solidarity. African communalism indicates that harmonious communal living, relationship, and solidarity are good because they are good for the individual and the individual's rights. Many interpretations of Mbiti's statement fail to see that the goal of and the reason for we are communal harmony and solidarity is I am individual well-being, dignity, and rights. A more plausible view of African communalism regarding the priority of duties is that it does not necessarily see a conflict between individual rights and duties to the community. And duties do not always trump rights. Rather, they are mutually supportive. People are required to have this moral attitude and to contribute to the community insofar as such contribution and duties ensure a system of rights and substantive individual rights. This moral attitude exemplifies the priority of duty that enables the community to provide the material conditions for individual substantive rights and well-being. African communalism indicates the mutual and coextensive nature of rights and duties because various duties exist for the sake of protecting individual rights and well-being. Because we is connected intimately with the I in the practical communal context, self-regarding concerns and individual well-being cannot be achieved without other regarding concerns in the community. The idea of a harmonious community involving the priority and reciprocity of duties can be captured by John Rawls' idea of a well-ordered society designed to advance the good of its members and effectively regulated by public conception of justice. McKinney argues that Rawls' view of justice in a well-ordered society comes close to capturing African communalism, priority of duty, and the moral status of personhood as the foundation for a conception of human rights. This duty of justice or respecting rights is owed to competent persons in a society who have the potential or capacity for justice and manifest or actualize such potential in the performance of duties and proper action guided by communal norms. McKinney adumbrates Rawls's view to argue that an individual comes to deserve the duties of justice and the confirmation therein implied of the individual's worth as a person only through the possession of a capacity for moral personality. Hence, in McKinney's view, morality ought to be considered as essential to our sense of ourselves as persons. We must understand McKinney's view of communalism, personhood, and priority of duties as reflecting Rawls's point that a well-ordered, harmonious community where duties are prioritized will advance the good, perfection, and rights of its members. Thus, personhood and substantive human rights for those who are competent involve a communally earned social status by virtue of performing and reciprocating duties that sustain and enhance a system of rights in the community. We may understand McKinney as saying that substantive rights, attaining personhood, and moral perfection derive from performing duties, and that duties are a significant way of maintaining a well-ordered community, communal system of rights and justice, and protecting other people's rights, and reciprocally one's own rights. Thank you.